I'm assistant professor of political science at Georgia Southern University.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll get started. So, the first criminal trial of a former president of the United States is expected to come to an end sometime soon, as the jury in the case of the people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump started deliberations Wednesday morning. Trump is charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records at his company in connection with an alleged scheme to hide potentially embarrassing stories about him during the 2016 Republican presidential election campaign. We want to bring in political science professor Dr. Kimberly Martin from Georgia Southern University. Dr. Martin, thank you so much for joining us today. So, first, tell us a
Thank
little
you.
bit about this case and what this means for American history.
Right. So this is the first time that we have had a former president who has been on trial and who could face a conviction and be either a candidate who is found guilty of a crime or potentially a president who has been found guilty of a crime.
And so, can you explain how we got to this point? Where did we start and how are we at deliberations in this trial right now?
Okay, so the trial started with some 2016, allegedly a cover up of a hush payment to a woman that Donald Trump had an alleged affair with at the time. And so, right now, under New York law, there's some questions about whether documents were falsified in order to cover up any hush money that was paid to this woman. And so, that could be considered a crime as well as violating other campaign finance laws as well. So at this point, that's what the jury is deliberating on, is trying to determine whether these crimes were committed.
And so, what's the ultimate question here? So, there's a lot of moving facts to this case, but what are jurors deciding right now?
Right. So jurors are deciding whether the hush money was essentially covered up in order to cover up other crimes that were being committed, such as election fraud or falsifying business documents. And so those fraud issues are the ones that are being considered right now. Right now, jurors are considering whether Donald Trump knew about these alleged payments, or whether his lawyer Michael Cohen knew about these payments and he knew nothing, because those things would determine whether he was guilty or not.
And so, a big part of this is a former president. This is the first that America has seen something like this happen. What does this mean for the future, the election? How big of an
Right.
impact will this be?
Well, what really depends on what the outcome of the trial is. So, if Trump is acquitted or if there's a hung jury, then his campaign and Donald Trump himself will see this as a huge victory. His supporters can feel vindicated and validated. There's been a lot of talk about this being motivated by partisan factors. And so, this will really sort of bolster those opinions from the campaign and from Donald Trump. So, you'll see him talk a lot about this on the campaign trail, if that's the case, if he is acquitted or if there's a hung jury. If he's found guilty, then that might make a difference as to how the election plays out in the fall. So, for instance, there's a poll out right now that talks about how 1 in 4 Republican voters have said that they would not vote for Donald Trump if he was convicted of the crime, if he was found guilty. And that same poll also says that 60% of independents might not vote for Donald Trump either. Now, there's a lot of pollsters who believe that this is a little bit high. Now, what we do know about people's opinions about Donald Trump is that people who support him or people who oppose him, their opinions are already ingrained. And nothing that happens during the trial is really going to change that. However, I will say that this race in the fall is going to be close between Biden and Donald Trump. And so, even if he's found guilty, and that is able to sway some moderate Republicans or some independents to either not vote for Donald Trump or to vote from Joe Biden. That might be that small amount that's needed to push Biden over the finish line.
Yeah, and you kind of said a little bit about it, but what are voters looking to hear from former President Donald Trump, President Biden? What do they want to hear from the leaders as we go through this historic time?
Right. So right now, Donald Trump, so right now it really depends on, what the outcome is for Donald Trump and how voters really see this. We have some ideas about how voters are going to see it, but we don't know for sure at this point. And I think, as far as the trials going forward, the ones in Georgia, the one in Washington, the one in DC for Donald Trump, this might not have a lot of bearing. The outcome of this trial might not have a lot of bearing on those cases, but it might change the way that people perceive Donald Trump moving forward, depending on the outcome. I know that Joe Biden is already gearing up to use some of the things that happened during the trial against Donald Trump in the upcoming election. So you're probably going to see that moving forward as well.
And just for clarity, for people who might not be familiar with the requirements of a presidential candidate, does this trial impact Donald Trump's chances of running for president, of continuing his campaign?
No, the Constitution doesn't say anything about having been committed of a crime, and having committed a crime, as far as being able to be eligible to run for president. What our founders really believed is that if there was reason to believe they committed a crime, then that process would play out through impeachments and through trials within the legislature, within the House and the Senate. And so they sort of saw that as a way for the branches to sort of check themselves in this case. So there are no instances where it says that that you could have committed a crime and not be eligible at this point. Now, how it will play out, whether he would be impeached for crimes if he is convicted, that's something that remains to be seen at this point.
We know that a lot of this depends on what the outcome is and what the jurors find and what the end of the trial looks like. Is there anything else that you think people should know? Any other information that should be top of mind for voters or just anyone trying to follow this trial?
Right. So the outcome of the trial does have a lot of bearing on what the Trump campaign will be able to do in the future. So at this point, he's been in and out in the courtroom since April 15th, which takes away from his time out on the campaign trail. So that is one thing that's happening during this election. Another thing is if the trial ends up he ends up being found guilty, then he will probably go and appeal the verdict, which will take away some valuable financial resources from his campaign as well. So that's one of the other reasons why this is kind of historic, because not only is this the first time happening, but it's happening during the campaign and it's taking away the candidate's focus and also potentially financial resources to have to deal with the trial itself.
All right, Dr. Martin, thank you so much for making time to chat with us today. I'm sure we'll be chatting more as this continues, but thank you for your time.
Great, thank you.